February the 12th, 2003, and this is the beginning of an interview with Mr. Lawrence Baxter, and he lives in 715 High Street in Onega, Kansas, here in Pottawatomie County. And Mr. Baxter was born August the 17th, 1922. So, how old are you now?
80.
You're 80 years old. My name is Dean Schoengert, and we're meeting in my home today in Wamego, Kansas, and I will be the interviewer. And I am the coordinator in our county for the Veterans Oral History Project. We thank you, Mr. Baxter, for coming in today. What were you doing? You remember what you were doing when Pearl Harbor started?
It was, when we heard it first, it was Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon, and you're...
And that was the big story that day, I'll tell you. And of course everybody knew that we was in trouble.
You were in high school?
And no, I graduated in 1940.
Oh, so you were already out of high school.
I was out of high school, and of course then right after Pearl Harbor, Fort Riley opened up, and I went up there and worked that winter, and then the summer of '41 I went to Wichita and went to work for Boeing.
Boeing Airport, there, really?
And I worked at Boeing till I got drafted.
Mm-hmm. So, when you were drafted, where did you go?
Went to Fort Leavenworth and got drafted there, and in '43, I didn't think I was ever going to leave Leavenworth, but anyway, I finally ended up in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Really?
There's where they sent me, and there's where I took my basic training. And then after I got my basic training, they sent me to Laurie Airfield in outskirts of Denver.
So how long were you in basic training?
I was in basic training, I don't know, 8 weeks, something like that.
That was...
And then they kind of cut that short a little bit because they wanted to fill classes out in Laurie Airfield. They wanted me to go through armament schools, what they called it at that time, loading bombs and air and in the big ones, and then in the fighters, your smaller guns we had to put the ammunition in for. It's what I was trained to do.
I see. How long did that last?
That lasted about 9 weeks, I believe, but I was there just a little longer than that, not much. Then I was sent to the West Coast in the spring now, and
The 44?
yeah. And when we left Denver, we left a big snowstorm. We got to California, of course, you know what they always advertise that for, sunshine, and it was. And then we we went just with a with a whole trainload of soldiers. But then anyway, I got to go with a bunch to what it amounted to just training new pilots. They were just cadets out of cadet school, and they sent us up in Washington State, and Ephrata was the name of the air base up there, and there's where we the pilots came in, and I don't remember how long it took, but anyway, they had P-38s up there, and of course we'd load the bombs on, and they were small, but and then put the ammunition in for their machine guns on the airplanes, and I trained there, helped train there for quite a bit.
That P-38 was a kind of a
Well, it was two
bodies to
Yeah.
it, didn't it?
and it was real nice. L5s was the last of the in World War II that came out, and they probably wasn't as glamorous as your others, but they was a nice. And Washington was kind of out in the nowhere where we was in the air base, but of course Kansas, it's when you're raised here, it's just pretty nice. But anyway, we spent all summer there then, and then we got an awful snowstorm.
Uh-huh.
So they called us all in and said, we're going to have to make some changes. So they said we was going to have to go back down to California. So they shipped us down, and then in about 2 weeks, while the planes finally arrived, because they said of course the government's got big equipment, but about the time they get the runways open, they'd blow shut. But anyway, we went down in Southern California, and that was I'll tell you, that was a big treat. And
Really, because of the weather and the snow up in Washington?
yeah, and then just take a train ride south and then get in the balmy weather. Boy, I'll tell you, that was. I was trying to think of the Daggett was one of the towns real close to that air base. I forget what air base we was at, really. But we was there all winter.
Really?
And
were you loading live bombs or?
well, there was 500-pound bombs, but what they done, they really didn't have much poop in them, but they had enough when they went off. They could tell, where they was, whether they hit the target or not.
Yeah. That target practice out in the
out
desert.
in the desert, yeah, Mojave Desert's where
Mojave
it
Desert.
was at. And anyway, we stayed there till spring. Then they decided there wasn't going to be no more pilots come in. So they took about half of us and put us back in the Army and sent us to Alexander, Louisiana. I'll never replace that. They had more snakes there than you could shake a stick at.
Oh, really?
But we trained there quite a bit, and of course, boys will be boys, and some of them shot a bunch of hogs. It's kind of wild hogs.
Wild hogs. Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't no more of that because they made them get out there and load them up and haul them off. So that was the end of that good time. But there's where we took our infantry training.
So they had you marching and carrying a pack
and sleeping on the ground and get up and they'd be snake because we'd be warm. You know, Louisiana's pretty swampy. And we got up and we had some Easterners there, and boy, they didn't think much of them snakes. And I told one of them, I said, well, I don't either. But anyway, it wasn't too bad, but I didn't like the patrol duty at night. I didn't really care for that because one time you're supposed to tell them to halt, and you know, in so many steps, why. Well, I told them to halt, and they just kept it coming, but it was a great big old sow with pigs. And so, got over that, but no, I didn't. Then when I got out of that, and then I had a DeLand route home. We was going overseas. So I got a DeLand route, and on the railroad, of course. And then I was report east. So I did, and then they issued us a lot of new gear to go overseas, overcoats too, to go to the Pacific.
Go to the Pacific.
Yep, and we had overcoats and everything you'd think of. Well, we went to, I remember where we went. We ended up in Stoneman, California. And I'd never been on a very good sized boat. So they loaded us up and told us that we'd have a lunch. Well, we didn't go in and see any of the sunken ships, but I noticed there was so many other big ships assembling, and I don't remember. I think was there almost 2 days, and we started out one evening. And boy, I'm telling you, I had never seen or paid any attention to destroyers, but boy, we had quite a convoy going there. But we zigzagged all the way across. Well, they took us straight to the Philippines. That's where we passed one island that you could see some sunken ships or hulls, you know, off of the. And so now this, well, I say I can't remember, but I remember it took us 43 days to get over there. We go one way and then just kept it zigzagging. Well, we got over in the Philippines and we unloaded this and went to shore. Didn't have no docks or nothing. They just unloaded this. Anyway, they had a big place there where it was replacements for these divisions, and I was put in the 41st Infantry Division, and they was
okay.
Anyway, I was put in the 41st Infantry Division, And of course, the rumors, the atomic bomb hadn't been dropped yet. There's a general come and told us that we would be on the invasion of the mainland Japan. So that didn't really, that when you're like that, well, that's just that. But then there was another officer come, and that's when it really woke us up. He said they'd probably be 100% casualties. The first wave that went in, and of course, that we was young, but it still stuck with us. But anyway, as we trained, our biggest trouble there. Now that was there we
This
were trained there, but our biggest trouble then was there was stray pockets of Japanese up in the hills, and they'd fire on us once in a while, but there's not too much come of that. But then we got our supplies off the Navy would bring in. And there was great rumors of war, and of course they wanted to take bets of when the war was going to be over and all that. And that went on for about 2 weeks, and as I remember right. And then they called us all out one day and said that a bomb had been dropped on Japan, and it was a bomb that never had been used before, and that's about all they said. And the war was just about to come to an end. Well, that was great news. We all thought maybe we was going home. Well, we wasn't. So in about a month, they loaded us up in a ship, and they said we was going to occupy Japan. Well, we got up to Okinawa and went in there. I don't know what for, but that big storm was coming on, and we went out. Of course, they made us turn around and get out of there. And there was several ships, and boy, they were just like corks out there. They'd go out of sight, and finally they made us go down below because the water was starting to come over the top. Anyway, we got up to Japan, and I call it Kure Naval Base. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, Kure Naval Base, and we was out, I don't know, I suppose a couple of miles. And I could see better than I do now. And there was a lot of activity. I'll tell you, of course, Japanese people almost run. And that went on for about a half a day because we just sat out there.
is it off of Okinawa?
No, Kure.
Oh.
We was there at Kure Naval Base.
Oh.
There in Japan, and the people was, I don't know, boy, they were just going every direction. Well, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we disembarked. And when you go in to invade some way, you get on those little boats, and they go in a circle, and we headed for shore, and I just knew we was going to get our butts blowed off, but we didn't. And it was well planned, because when we got there, there was a little dock that we could get off, nothing fancy, get off on, and we got all of our men off and lined up, and one of the fellows said to us, said, "Now this is going to be a long march, probably 3 or 4 hours." And anyway, every intersection. Now I want everybody to get every intersection. There was a Japanese, either police officer or military, but they didn't face us. Their back was toward us. And we marched. Of course, our place was all ready for us, but we marched about 3 or 4 hours before we got to this particular place, and it was nothing fancy. It was just a great big building, and I know several of us commented it was so clean. Boy, I'm telling you, it was clean. Well, we was there about a month, I guess. Then they asked for volunteers. Well, nobody volunteered. So they took, I think there's about 200 of us. And they took us out in just, I thought it was just out in the boondocks, but we kept going, and there's just a little old village, and they had a lot of ammunition. A lot of ammunition. Casings. And they was going to melt all those down. Huh. But then there was about 6-inch by 3-inch little bars, but they had to be accounted for. So that was my job. That went on 24 hours a day, and that's all of our job was, just be sure that there was counted, and we had to turn that in, of course, 8-hour shifts.
Is this some kind of precious metal, or?
Well, no, they just the casings. They just didn't, and then they wanted us to go over and be sure that Japan had a great machine shops, and it had U.S. on it too. But anyway, we went over, and they was long pieces of kind of bronze metal. I think 2-inch in diameter is the biggest. And we went over there, and they loaded that on a barge. And I don't know how many thousands or millions of dollars we dumped out in the ocean. And then when we got that done, why, or we wasn't quite done, but anyway, they wanted volunteers for about 10 or 12 soldiers. Well, nobody volunteered, so I was one of them they picked, and they had leather goods, like old saddles and stuff like that. And I expect that pile was as high as this ceiling and probably half a block long. And they burn it.
Is this in southern Japan?
The Americans just plain old burn it.
I'm not sure where this is now. Philippines or Japan?
Japan. That was in Japan.
On the mainland of Japan.
And they just burnt that. Well, then we went back to where we started from, and they said, "You're going on a tour tomorrow." So, well, that was all right, but I'm not sure it was all right. It's because where they dropped the bomb, they went in there with bulldozers and just bulldozed them. And the Army trucks with all these GIs went. And you can't believe how hot that atomic bomb was. It just, uh, well, a sake bottle, that's what they had their liquor in, was about like, but it would be about like another bottle of old lime ricky or something like that. They was just fused together, melded together. The trucks, and I'm saying trucks, that we saw, it just burnt the tires off them. They wasn't just nothing standing. And they had some pretty good buildings. Their propaganda said they was all just would burn up, but and it just like a stone building, there was nothing left but the frame. It just burned everything. And the first thing you notice when we come into town, that river was pretty good size, about like this Call River probably, and a bridge about like that. The bridge was there, but the banister was gone. It just blowed the banister, the railings were gone. And of course they had so many tile roofs, and you notice those kind of wrinkles and out of shape. And boy, when you got where the bomb really went off, I'll tell you, I don't know, I suppose that was a mile you could see it, just nothing but rubble. Trees, everything gone. So,
This would be how long after the bomb?
about 2 months.
2 months.
And then after we got off of that, why then they decided that, see, you went home on points. Well, some of us shouldn't even went there because we had almost enough points to go home. Well, they decided they needed people to go in where they had all their trucks stored that didn't hardly run, and the semi trailers, needed work on them and stuff like that. And they picked out the mechanics naturally to do, and I wasn't no mechanic. But anyway, I worked on semi trailers there, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And a lot of them didn't need much, maybe a tire or something, and as you know, and everybody else knows, we're pretty wasteful. But we got a lot of those deals. There wasn't nothing wrong with them, just a little. Maybe air brakes didn't work, and we put in a new line, And
This was American equipment or Japanese?
American equipment.
American equipment.
All of it is American equipment.
Okay.
Anyway, we got along pretty good, and then they come and told us we had so many points we'd go home. Well, I had enough points that I got to come home, and I was really happy about that. But I'd heard that you really got a fantastic dinner. It's your first meal home. And we went up in Washington there, Puget Sound went in through there, and of course, they was a little kind of like a tugboat, and of course they had their band and the singers and entertained us all. Boy, did we get a wonderful meal, anything you wanted. Then after that, I went to Colorado and Fort Logan, and there's where I was discharged and come home. And that was my Army experience.
But how many years and months was that now?
About 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
2.5 years. But as far as me getting on any, blood and guts deal, I didn't get in on that.
Well, very interesting, Mr. Baxter. Thank you for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's our privilege.